You're listening to the Goldnomics podcast, with new episodes every month on iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Subscribe to stay informed. Welcome to episode 6 of the Goldnomics podcast, where we're looking at the developments in global financial markets through the lens of precious metals. And we're releasing a new podcast every month, and you can subscribe and stay up to date on YouTube, on iTunes, and on SoundCloud. And as usual, I'm joined again today by Research Director of GoldCore, Marco Byrne, and CEO of GoldCore, Stephen Flood. Welcome, gents, once again.
Hi, David.
Hey, David.
And today our topic for discussion is Trump's war with China. And one of the reasons that, Mark, you suggested this podcast topic this month was it was on the back of a Ray Dalio tweet. Now, for those that don't know, Ray Dalio is the head of Bridgewater Associates, which is basically the world's largest fund manager. So we're talking about a man here with a lot of clout. And what exactly was the tweet that he tweeted out recently?
Today is the first day of the war with China.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
So, yeah, it was quite I think it surprised a lot of people, and people are trying to figure out what exactly did he mean, and did he actually mean war? Does he mean trade wars? So, yeah, I felt it was quite important. I think a lot of people in the markets did. He is, as you said, he's the founder of Bridgewater Associates. This is the largest hedge fund in the world today. They manage $160 billion in assets. So they're big. And when this man speaks, markets listen. And not only markets, he has the ear of government as well. This guy is he's the real deal, and he's important to listen to. And what's interesting about him as well, he's not just big on Wall Street. He's actually now cultivated himself quite a big global following in social media. He's all over Twitter, as we said, with that tweet, and he's been on Twitter for a number of years now, and on LinkedIn he does a lot, and even on Facebook. So he is followed very widely, and that tweet got massive traction internationally. And we think it's important to examine, well, what is he saying? And is he being alarmist here? Did he misspeak? Did he meant to have trade in that tweet, and there was missing a word? I don't think so. And I think from reading the man, we've actually covered Ray Dalio and what he says for many years in our market updates and news and commentary. And he is, very articulate man, and he has long had concerns about the way the world is going, and the risk that trade wars could actually lead ultimately to real wars and damages that this will create to the wider society. He's quite evolved in his thinking. He's not your typical sort of Wall Street guy. He looks at the economy sort of reasonably holistically, and it doesn't just come at it from a Wall Street perspective.
Okay, well, why don't we start by, I suppose, let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he's not warmongering or suggesting that Trump is warmongering. What's the background to this in terms of the trade wars that are now starting globally?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, and you can see that the antagonist here is Trump. He is echoing probably a frustration that his base is communicating to him, which would be maybe the lower middle class American voter. These are people who have felt the full force and effect of globalization, with their jobs and jobs disappearing or being replaced, their factories closing down. What were large wealthy cities, contracting and becoming desolate places, and they have found themselves increasingly marginalized by the system, which embraces technology, which embraces services, where you can buy products at a tenth of the price from markets, 6,000, 9,000 miles away. And so they haven't had any voice for many, many years. They've been told, listen, you're just going to have to embrace this change. You never voted for it. You're going to have to live with it. And the only answer is for you to skill up, to become more relevant, to provide products and services on our terms, not your own terms, and move to bigger cities. And this has happened in America. This is happening in China, where you have the old agrarian, agricultural basis villages, and people moving en masse into big cities, and some cities that just make one thing, and they're just highly focused and specialized. And so this globalization trend has been, has come about since post World War II, and it's really increased in speed in the 1980s and 90s, and now what we're seeing is being a political side of it, and people are voting, and they're voting for protectionism to protect their jobs and their communities and their people and their children. And so it's not unreasoned. There is a reason for it, and that's what we're seeing.
So basically, what we're seeing a large developing economy. China, in this instance, has a cheap workforce, a cheap labor force, is able to produce, as we all know and has been for the last number of decades, goods at a significantly cheaper price than they can be produced domestically in America. And as a result, even when they import them, when they transport them from China, they're cheaper than being able to make them in America. This is affecting jobs naturally, and production and manufacturing and so on and so forth in America.
And in any economy, like even seeing Chinese workers are being supplanted by Vietnamese workers who are able to do things cheaper again, and you're going to see this process going on and on. So some people might say it's a race to the bottom when it comes to pay and conditions for workers. So if workers have the vote, they're going to vote for what's in their interest, and Trump is echoing that, and he's saying, I need to protect my American families. I need to protect their industries, and this is what they would choose to work at. So I'm going to protect that industry. Now, the Economist says, "Hey, if you do this, they're just going to retaliate, and you're going to help one section of your society of workers at the cost of others in your society, and everybody's going to pay higher prices." So if you say, "Hey, you know what? You can't buy your iPhone that's manufactured in China anymore. You're going to have to buy it in America or somewhere else, some other provider of it, and like Vietnam maybe might step up and start providing them." Everyone's going to pay more for that, and therefore the cost of living, cost of prices of products all go up. So everyone loses.
Exactly. Yeah. So those pros and cons in terms of this pact that they had in effect in terms of what the globalization was, in terms of, as Stephen said, the Chinese got the benefits in terms of production and jobs and manufacturing, and then the U.S. consumer became the consumer of goods and services in the world, and they managed to get all these Chinese goods very, very cheap, and they got the benefits of that, of the Chinese labor and production, and Walmart became one of the biggest shopping centers, a supermarket, should I say, in the world, selling these cheap goods, But, that's beginning to change. I think there's a realization that is completely unsustainable, and we need to move to a more balanced world, and especially because of the U.S. debt position, which is, 21, I think last time I looked at 21.2 trillion and rising very, very rapidly, So that's what's happening. And just yesterday alone, Trump announced, the question, it's funny, in the last few months, people are saying, oh, it's just a negotiation and it's Trump's aggressive style and there won't be trade wars. We're actually in a trade war right now. Only yesterday, he announced another $200 billion on Chinese imports alone.
So this is an increase on tariffs that weren't there before. So
exactly.
Now
it's a list of things he's going to target.
Yeah.
And but it's going to happen in the next few weeks or months. And he's egging them on. He's saying I want to balance this imbalance in our deficit. And if you look at economists, they say, the U.S. has a deficit with 140 countries around the world. You don't solve that by targeting 2 or even half of those countries. You need to look at your savings and your investment rate as a country and fix it there, and improve your own productivity as well, and address those imbalances.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the bigger risk is, I don't know who said it first. I think it was Gerald Celente, but he may have sort of popularized the phrase. But the phrase is: trade wars lead to currency wars, lead to hot wars, actual wars, shooting wars, and that's throughout history. This has been seen, particularly obviously in the 1930s. It started with trade wars after the Wall Street crash in 1929, and then the Great Depression in the 1930s. Tariffs came in a big way. We had an economic war in a big way, and soon we were in a world war and World War II. So, and today shooting wars would involve nuclear arms. And that's the big risk. And China is a nuclear power, and Russia is a nuclear power. So when you get into this high stakes brinksmanship, it's very dangerous indeed. And I think that's what Ray Dalio, I think he was warning about that. I think he's genuinely concerned. I think he's right to be genuinely concerned. These are real risks. The
stakes are high. The stakes are really, really high. And it's interesting. Again, the backdrop. Again, looking at the populations and the people who are disaffected. I think an awful lot of the actual mainstream populations we exist. I think in a time of distraction now. the average person is inundated with information and
bombarded with it, yeah.
Bombarded with it all day. And that actually has a very real impact in terms of our ability to focus on what's really important. And so this whole idea of trade wars, we're kind of like, yeah, well, that's interesting, but it's not going to affect me today. Well, it is going to affect you today. This is really happening, and it can get out of hand, and not because somebody planned it. There's probably no blueprint in the White House on the Oval Desk that says this is the steps we're going to take and this is the effect it's going to happen. They are winging it. They are absolutely making this up as they go along.
So there's like kind of no understanding of the ultimate potential consequences of this. No. I mean, like, because some people that listen to the podcast are going to say, well, this is just Trump doing what he said he was going to do. This is part of making America great again. This is the consequence of this trade war, is it's going to make America great again. And what you're kind of suggesting there is that it potentially could have the opposite effect, but it also could have some serious consequences, unintended
consequences.
Absolutely, and it's not just Trump. I mean, Trump is the figurehead, and all the evils of the world are projected on Trump, and he's an extremely divisive figure. But it's the entire U.S. government, and everyone he's appointed in government. He's appointed a lot of very, very extremely hawkish people. John Bolton, Pompeo, the various generals in the McMaster. These are hardcore hawks. And foreign policy used to be a bit more balanced.
Yeah, just for people who may not understand the phrase hawkish when it comes to politicians.
Well, hawkish. Politicians are military men, tend to be men more than women. They tend to be people who would tend to lean more towards military solutions rather than diplomacy. In a nutshell, I mean, that's quite simplistic. But American foreign policy has been guided over the years by the State Department and by the Pentagon. And it's a bit simplistic to say, but generally the State Department would be a little bit more dovish, and they would seek diplomatic solutions, and the Pentagon will obviously, they specialize in military or defense or military, and they would tend to focus on those sort of solutions. And there was this sort of balance, whereas today the State Department seems to be fairly much neutered, and the Pentagon's in charge. And it's not just that; even in the State Department, people in there are quite hawkish, And this has been a progression that's happened all throughout the years. It's slow, slowly but surely happened. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, the general, in 1953, warned about the military-industrial complex. And if you read his speeches about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, this is what's slowly coming to pass.
It's playing out right now. I mean, hawks are more stick than carrot, and they believe in kind of projected force, and but also they also want an economy that works on what they determine to be fair. But they believe power, is the most important thing, and that is influence, and that also then translates into prosperity. Whereas doves, they look at more of a democratic system where people work together and they bring the best to the table, and it's more on a meritocratic basis.
Now, I'm not sure I agree 100%, but I mean, the Hawks just tend to be more military focused. And I think more nationalist, and they're mocking. You're alluding to globalization before, and the globalized world. The Hawks are more about the national interest, and as you said, Dave, USA, making America great again. They're not thinking about the global picture and how we're all interrelated in this globalized economy. So, and Stephen alluded to it's the uncertainty, and all it takes is one wrong move by a Trump or a Xi or a Putin, and there's a lot of tensions in the world, and this can lead to a lot of uncertainty and instability. And the great phrase by Winston Churchill was, "It's better to jaw than to war." And this is a man who won World War II. He was very happy to use the military when it needed to be used. He wasn't some peacenik, some dove, some crazy hippie. And I actually went to see in what context did he say that, because I wasn't sure. I've always long known the phrase, but I couldn't remember where it came from. And, he basically said it in the context of in the early stages of the Cold War, early 1950s, Stalin, who was a true tyrant and killed millions and millions of people in Russia, compared to Putin, who we've demonized in recent years. Putin was an angel compared to Stalin, but Churchill was saying, the whole media and everybody was saying we should go to war with the Russians, and Churchill said, hang on a second, these people have nuclear weapons, it's better to jaw than to war. But he had a great quote which speaks to that whole thing about, the unforeseeable events can take place, and just the lack of control and how these things can get out of hand very quickly. And he basically said, the statesman who yields to war fever must realize that once the signal is given, he is no longer the master of policy, but the slave of unforeseeable and uncontrollable events. I think it's just a great quotation. Sort of captures the essence of it. And with Trump at the White House, it just creates this huge variable. So many variables now. On so many fronts, it's hard to keep up with it.
And Trump has made this effectively. It's like a declaration of trade war with his list of potential products for tariffs. Now he's waging this trade war against China. What's the response been from China at this stage then?
Yeah, it's not just China; it's also Europe, and Canada. I mean, he's targeted allies and foes alike, and he's not discriminating. So he's not really looking at the outward effect. He's looking at the inward resonance of this internally and domestically. And I think he's trying to secure his next election bid. He wants to have a second term, and that second term will allow him to put in place even more bolder strategies and policies to turn America into what he wants it to be. There's a lot of people out there. It's interesting. His whole narrative and the way he speaks. He's not specific, and he'll say one thing one day and something else the next day, and yet people only hear what really kind of confirms their own biases. And they say, well, he agreed that day with me, and I haven't actually listened ever since. And so, he has this kind of this strange support group or support within the domestic apparatus there, and he's changing the Republican Party as well. So it's finding it's resonating with his base, and I think he's on an election strategy, and he wants to turn around at the end of this term and say, you know what, these are the 10 things I said, and look, I've worked on all of them, even to my own detriment politically. Yeah, I'm trustworthy, so I'm a strong man. Believe in me, and now I'll change America and its apparatus and its functions to suit myself and what my view of the world is.
I would agree with that. One thing he did actually in his whole campaign, he promised peace, and he said he'd push for peace. He wouldn't be getting America involved in unnecessary wars. And he's done quite the opposite, and the concern now is at the policy level, it looks like it's almost a perpetual war policy. It's quite he is much more hawkish than anybody ever thought he would be. So, but to your point about the Chinese and their response, they're basically preparing. They're targeting certain U.S. goods and services, and I think they've looked politically as well where it might actually hurt Trump and Trump heartland, in terms of jobs. So it's getting quite and there's already personal in some ways.
Yeah, there's already evidence of that as well. Sure, wasn't it? Harley Davidson with the EU.
Whiskey,
the EU brought in tariffs on Levi jeans, on Harley Davidson, on bourbon, and wasn't there a response then from Harley Davidson that said, well, actually, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to move more of our manufacturing to Europe. Yeah. So effectively moving jobs out of the States.
So this is the next stage. So
actually doing the thing that he was trying to avoid. He's trying to keep jobs at home, and some of the unintended consequences of these actions is it's actually losing jobs to abroad.
Yeah, and literally, if you go back to Adam Smith, he talked about tariff and trade wars and the folly of them. I mean, they literally just basically raise the costs for everybody in the economy. They save one group and at the expense of everyone else, and they do nothing at all. So it's very very ignorant and very backward looking to launch singular trade tariff wars and think it's going to win. I mean, again, it's not a win lose. It's a lose for everybody, and it puts an extra premium on the cost of business throughout the world. You look at China, though, which I think is really interesting, because if you look at China and the amount of investment it's made externally, foreign direct investment in other markets, and it's through the roof. I mean, it was I think it was 20 billion back in 2005. In 2016, it hit 270 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's gone through the roof, and they are investing in the Silk Road, which is basically they're putting money into infrastructure in like ports and power systems, so they can get their goods to market. But that creates influence. That means that they are expanding their influence at the cost of others, which would be the United States and Europe to a lesser extent. That's causing friction. This is selling at home back to the States, the domestic market, and so you could also look at China as saying that it's now pushing up against what were traditional American lines of power, and so now this is also a part of part of the formula as well. So it's very interesting. And what is China going to do? They need to export in order to grow. They have such huge growth rates. They have a big population that they've mobilized in the last 10, 15 years. They need to give them jobs. They need to keep making stuff, and they need to get that stuff to market quicker because they're competing against the next lower tier of labor.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a guy, we actually met him, I don't know if you remember, Stephen, at Goldnomics, Harold Mamgren.
Oh, he's amazing.
And he was advisor to 5 or 6 US presidents,
Oh, yeah.
Old guy, but really savvy, smart, and a career diplomat, not a diplomat, more just an advisor behind the scenes, but very much a foreign policy expert,
Well, he worked with them all, these presidents. And
exactly,
Pippa Malmgren was his daughter. She's fantastic.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, we met him at Goldnomics, but he, on Twitter last week, he interacted with us, and he basically said, Trump knows how to make headlines that strengthen his own base, but dealing with China, Trump could make much greater gains through private interaction that could ever be achieved in public confrontation with Xi. And, Xi, the Chinese are all about face, and Trump's style of communication is just so counterproductive and so damaging, and you just don't know what the ramifications are, and behind the scenes, we've covered the trade wars here. Behind the scenes, these currency wars are going on, and the Chinese own a huge amount of US debt. And they're the biggest creditor in the world, $3.1 trillion. And they're buying gold quietly, accumulating gold. We're due an announcement from the People's Bank of China soon about their gold reserves. The Americans have 8,100 tons of gold in reserve. The Chinese today report at 1,800. But they have aspirations to get where the Americans are, and they can get there. They're, as I said, they're quietly accumulating, and they have aspirations to make the yuan the global reserve currency. And that would very much put the US under huge pressure, because if the dollar is no longer the global reserve currency, the value of the dollar becomes at risk, and
they can't print money.
And then they can't print money, and they find it hard to fund these defense budgets and the massive expenditure that's going on in that regard. So I think that's the Chinese play chess, and Trump plays checkers or drafts. They think more long term strategically, and Trump thinks in terms of 4 minutes, 4 hours, 4 months, 4 years. His election term. Xi and the Chinese are thinking. They're thinking, 4 decades. That's what they are.
Just in terms of Xi now, sure. Recently, the rules in China have been changed with respect to the term of presidents there.
Well, there's a strongman thing there as well. But
he's naturally now. He's a longer time horizon.
Well, good point looking like that. Yeah.
Than Trump would. Trump can have a maximum of the next 6 years. So. And Xi
4 and then 8, yeah. 6 more, exactly.
6 more years from now, and Xi has, well, I don't know what age he is, but he has an awful lot longer than 6 years.
I think as a society as well, it's not just the Trump and Xi, but just they do, even I think the Wall Street view short term, quarterly, 3 months. I think it's affected the body politic. It's always about the short term, and we alluded to social media as well. The time horizons are just, we're very distracted, and there's no one taking a medium and long term view, or very rarely.
I'm gonna have to go and take Trump's side on this one as well, in terms of. Well, no, I look at him as being a reflection of stresses and anxieties at the base, and I don't think that they're wrong. I think that what was a social contract before, that you went to school, you educated yourself, you went to work, you worked hard, you got a reward, you got stability in your job, and you felt good about yourself, has changed since 2000 arguably, and personal productivity has actually gone sideways in the West, where people aren't making any greater gains for themselves as workers. Companies are doing better and better every year. Some economies are doing better, but it's not trickling down to the man on the street, and they feel anxious about this. And so I think Trump is reflecting that, and he's looking to protect those jobs. He's trying to answer a problem with a solution that he thinks is correct. Now, it probably is not correct, it's probably going to create and exacerbate the problem more. Looking at China, again, it's the same problem. This is a reflection of what's coming from the base. They need to keep these people busy. They're trying to expand their markets. They're bolstering up or moving up against other traditional competitors. And again, it may not be the right answer. So I think we're in a huge period of change, and it's the era of the strong man, and I think it's going to be the era of the unintended consequence. But it's also it's a reflection of globalization again, and the risks of it. I mean, ultimately, it's about communities and people and families, and they need to be protected, and they need to have a surety for the future. And globalization is not delivering that. It's actually a problem, and I don't know the answer, but that's what's being politically transmitted.
Mark, as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. In terms of what you're suggesting historically, with trade wars being early stages that come before a potential hot war, is that something that's on the cards? I mean,
you can't completely rule it out, I mean, we haven't even mentioned Russia in this whole equation, and I suppose Russia's been effectively demonized for the last, I suppose, 5 years plus, and now it seems that China is increasingly becoming the bogeyman, and it's like we need, our great leaders, seem to want to have this massive perceived external threat, and I think it's a distraction away from it. It consolidates their power, and it rallies the troops and the party and people around them. So it's almost a bit of a power play, And I think it distracts from the real world problems in the economy. So
and it also funds the military industrial complex.
It does, yeah, and it's that's money that could be spent in. Stephen mentioned what the Chinese are investing in infrastructure, and in science and technology and development and healthcare and education and all the things that we value as a society. This it's very, very destructive what's happening, and in fairness, it's not just Trump. It's the Republican Party have become this sort of neoconservative and of that sort of hawkish worldview of maintaining a U.S. hegemony, but the Democrats are quite like that as well in terms of foreign policy. So it's not really a socialist versus conservative, or Labour versus Tory, or Republican versus Democrat. It's a much deeper issue that's been going on for continuum, and there's actually, and a lot of it, large sections of the media as well are cheerleading this. It's funny. There was a headline there only in the Times of London there, I think it was a week or 2 weeks ago, and it says fears growing over prospect of Trump peace deal. just like, how could anybody fear peace, But the problem was they didn't want Trump to make peace with Putin because Putin's a really bad guy, and that would be Trump engaging in appeasement, So the narrative is peace is bad, it's quite Orwellian, when you see a headline like that.
Economically, peace can be bad.
No, I don't think so. I mean, war, this is a key question, and I hear people say to me sometimes, war is good for the economy and it's good for business, and it's like, it only benefits tiny segments of society, and that's the defense industry and the armaments companies and the people who supply them with the raw materials and the technology and the parts.
It's a broken window fallacy.
Yeah, exactly. It's very, very simplistic in the extreme, and it does pump prime the economy. And you see Trump at NATO now in Brussels yesterday, and he's browbeating everyone in NATO. They need to spend more on armaments. You need to spend more and contribute to NATO. Meanwhile, the US is the biggest exporter of arms in the world. They've massive trade deficits. So they're actually using, it's funny, it's like a protection racket. It's like, there's uncertainty in the world where he's creating a lot of the uncertainty. And then it's like, now, because of uncertainty, you have to buy arms from us. And that'll help us balance our budgets,
Genius.
But no one even talks about that, It's like elephant in the room, and it's like, that's a conspiracy theory. It's like, hang on a second.
See, all of these, there's a lot of narrative out there, and there's a lot of posturing. But now we're getting into the business of business. This is actually where these trade tariffs are going to start biting. Jobs are going to be lost, and responses are going to be made. And I think the repercussions of this narrative is going to be felt. And now I wonder what's going to happen then. what will be the response then? Will they follow up? Is it a bluff? Will they try to dial it down? Will he be found out as a blustering buffoon, or is he actually really some sort of crazy, mad, strongman genius that actually is going to, terraform the world's economy back to an American hegemony again? I don't know. I mean, I don't think China's going to lie down. I think Europe is actually a key player in this because Europe has a massive global economy and a very, very big middle class footprint. And maybe it doesn't have as much unity about its purpose, but I think something like this, a threat like this, might bring Europe closer together and consolidate its power, as it might do China as well. So he might be, in fact, creating much more powerful foes to the American economy just through his rhetoric than before.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bottom line, in terms of what we do, we need to come full circle and get back into what's the ramifications of this.
I mean, what does this actually mean for savers and investors?
Yeah. Well,
I know what you're going to say. Buy gold.
No, I never say that. I wouldn't dream of saying that. Buy gold and silver. No, but just before I get into that, because it actually answers the question in some ways. I alluded to the speech by Eisenhower, and if you read any of his speeches, they're just, they're amazing, and quite poetic, but everything that we've spoken, I think he captures it in these two sentences. It says, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. It's just so powerful. And that's what it is. You're basically robbing from the rest of society, and siphoning all these funds into this one sector,
It's the utility of war.
Exactly, yeah. And we all have to pay for it in taxes. And in inflation, which will come out of this,
Yep.
So in terms of investors and savers, the bottom line is it creates a much more uncertain world, economically and financially. And we've alluded to this in our podcast. We have an everything bubble with stocks and bonds at all-time record highs, many property markets throughout the world, all-time record highs, all based on cheap credit and near 0% interest rates. Now we have this massive uncertainty. Trade wars will ultimately and potentially, we may not have a real actual war between China and the US, or indeed Russia and the US. I don't think that will happen. I think they're not that stupid, because ultimately it could result in mutually assured destruction and nuclear bombs on Washington, D.C. and on New York, and your real worst case scenario. So I don't think they will ever allow it to go that far. But what you could see is quite serious proxy wars in North Korea, in Taiwan, in Ukraine, on the borders of Europe, and all that is very, very destructive and very, very uncertain.
In Syria, like we've seen for the last
Syria, in the
number of
Middle
years.
East, is absolutely a powder keg for years. It's amazing that it hasn't blown up, and it will at some stage. And so anyway, the bottom line is that is all, it's uncertainty, and ultimately it will lead to, well, who knows, it will lead to serious inflation most probably, but it could lead to stagflation, and obviously we're seeing hyperinflation in certain economies, including Syria and Venezuela and Zimbabwe.
I'd look at everything he has said and done. And I would say in all other presidents, you tend to have, they want to make an impact themselves, but they also want to hand over a better economy to the next leader, the next administration. But everything he says and everything he does seems to signify a short-termism about him. He's not even thinking of handing over, which is a strong-man mindset. He sees himself as a permanent leader, almost, even though the Constitution doesn't support that, but all his decisions and actions to date which suggest that is his frame of reference. Short-termism, him alone, what he is trying to do, and he doesn't even see a handover of power in the future.
So, back to the question then. What does this mean for savers and investors?
Diversify. So those three very important words, and they're so, diversification is so simple about putting eggs in different baskets, but people sort of understand it, but unfortunately they infrequently do it,
So you're not just talking about stocks, bonds, property, but you're also talking about global diversification, so that you don't have a massive exposure to
any one country,
any one
currency. Exactly, yeah. Any one economy, any one sector. So yeah, real diversification in that regard. And I think the bottom line is it poses a big risk to assets in general, and stocks, bonds, property that are record highs, but also to cash. because I think inflation or stagflation will take off at some stage, So it speaks the need to basically become more defensive in terms of your asset allocations and to rebalance your portfolios and take money out of the assets that have performed very well in recent years and look quite toppy indeed, and reallocate into the sectors that look more of good value, including gold, which is obviously a very defensive asset and a proven safe haven asset. One other thing on that is cash. There's the risk of inflation, but there's also the risk of bail-ins. And when we get into the next financial crisis, which is coming, we don't know exactly when, but it's coming as sure as night follows day. Then, it's not just taxpayers who are going to be feeling the brunt of it in terms of bailouts. We are going to see cash come into the equation and deposits come into the equation, and that's what bail-ins are. There'll be a form of deposit confiscation, and the deposit guarantees we see today will probably be reduced overnight from €100,000 or $100,000 to €50,000, $50,000, and that speaks to the need to not have too much cash in any one bank, and also to own gold outside the banking system.
I think very quickly, I think people need to invest in themselves, in their own education, in their own capacity to change jobs or industries, or even look to, can they live and operate in other markets as well? I think flexibility is the key for the future. In terms of investment assets, hard assets probably very important. Good property, commodity-backed currencies, a little bit of gold and silver in there. And then just invest in your education and be as flexible as possible.
Right. So bringing it back to Ray Dalio tweet, today may not necessarily be the first day of war with China, but the trade wars are definitely on, and the gloves are off.
The trade wars and the currency wars, and fingers crossed, wise heads will prevail, and we'll see the egotistical nonsense and high stakes brinksmanship just calm down a bit,
Subside.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure if it's going to happen anytime soon, but fingers crossed.
Right. Okay, gents. Well, listen, I think we'll leave it there for today. That's been fantastic. Thanks again once more to Mark and to Steve.
Thank you, Dave.
And that has been the Goldnomics podcast, episode 6, Trump War with China. Now, I want to make sure that everybody stays up to date. You can stay up to date with all of our podcasts on YouTube, on SoundCloud, and you can subscribe on iTunes as well. And also you can sign up to our market updates and more of our videos, our reports at GoldCore.com. So from me, Dave Russell, thank you very much.
You're listening to the Goldnomics podcast, with new episodes every month on iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Subscribe to stay informed.